Canada could move $12 billion worth of food and beverage exports to non-U.S. markets, according to a new report by Farm Credit Canada. It's a strategy aimed at reducing our dependence on the U.S. market, which, as you know, remains strained.
Canada has unveiled a new plan that changes the balance in North American trade. According to a report by Farm Credit Canada, the country could redirect up to 12 billion Canadian dollars worth of food and beverage exports away from the United States. For decades, American policymakers assumed that Canada's agricultural sector would remain tied to the U.S. market. Now, under the pressure of President Trump's reciprocal tariffs, Ottawa is moving in the opposite direction. What was designed as a tool to force Canada back to the table is instead driving one of the largest diversification efforts in Canadian history. The numbers matter, but the story behind them matters even more. It is a story of how trade pressure intended to tighten control is opening the door to greater independence. The report from Farm Credit Canada outlines three main areas of action. The first is expanding interprovincial trade inside Canada itself. More investment in moving food products across provinces can reduce reliance on the single north-south corridor that dominates today. The second is using the free trade agreements that Canada already has with Europe and Asia. Those agreements give Canadian producers preferential access and make them competitive in sectors like dairy, grains, and beverages. The third is finding entirely new global markets where processed foods and vegetable oils could be shipped. The scale of the problem is clear. In 2018, 67% of Canadian food and beverage exports went to the United States. By the end of 2023, that share had risen to 76%. Farm Credit Canada warns that such dependence makes the industry vulnerable to sudden shifts in policy. The new target is to bring the U.S. share closer to 50%. Processed foods are especially promising because they have longer shelf life and can travel further. Vegetable oils are another growth area, as demand is expanding in multiple regions. The underlying message is straightforward. The United States will remain the top market, but it can no longer be the only one. For Washington, this strategy carries real consequences. Analysts estimate that roughly 2.6 billion Canadian dollars, or nearly $2 billion US dollars, in current food and beverage exports could be shifted out of the American market. That means US importers may have to pay more to source the same goods from other countries. Depending on transport costs and availability, replacement could add $100 to $300 million in extra expenses each year. The overall scale is small compared with the $900 billion in annual two-way trade, but the symbolic impact is large. The deeper cost is political. America's tariffs were supposed to increase leverage over Ottawa. Instead, they are accelerating diversification. If Canada successfully builds durable supply routes to Europe and Asia, Washington will find it harder to use tariffs as a bargaining chip. For American consumers, the adjustment could mean higher prices for certain imported foods. For American farmers, the risk is that Canada becomes a stronger competitor in third markets where both countries are chasing the same demand. The effort to force Canada into line may end up reducing U.S. influence in the very sector it was trying to control. The lesson is visible in the numbers. In just 5 years, dependence rose from 67% to 76%, and only now is Canada charting the course to bring it back down. That change will not happen overnight. Farm Credit Canada makes clear that it will take years of investment and trade promotion, but the direction is set. Instead of locking Canada into closer dependence, Trump's tariff policy has pushed it to explore escape routes. The United States remains a vital partner, but it is no longer seen as the sole destination. This is the backfire effect of economic pressure. What began as an attempt to show strength may end as the moment Washington lost part of its grip on the Canadian food supply chain.
The U.S. ambassador to Canada was on the defensive in Halifax, accusing Canada of playing hardball when it comes to trade talks. Pete Hoekstra repeatedly told the Halifax Chamber of Commerce that Canada has it wrong, saying this isn't a trade war.
I would suggest that he gets a mirror and looks in it, because the issues that are between the US and Canada are caused by the US.
Trade tensions between the United States and Canada have dragged on for months, fueled by President Trump's reciprocal tariffs. Into this already heated atmosphere came U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra speaking in Halifax. He tried to calm the waters, insisting this was not a trade war but only negotiations. He went further, saying Canadians lacked passion for the relationship with America. Instead of reducing tension, his words hit like a spark in dry grass. What was meant to soften the debate only hardened attitudes. For many Canadians, it sounded dismissive, even insulting.
Well, when you kick the dog, you can't blame it for snarling back. When you talk about annexation and you talk about a 51st state and you treat your partner like a second class.
All I know is I don't want to cross over right now to the U.S.
The reaction was immediate and emotional. Ordinary Canadians pushed back, accusing Washington of gaslighting. They pointed out that tariffs imposed by Trump were the true source of pain. People expressed their frustration in daily choices. More Canadians now choose to shop at home rather than cross the border. Statistics Canada reported that in August 2025, cross-border car trips returning from the United States fell by 34% compared to the previous year. U.S. alcohol sales inside Canada have declined, while Canadian book sales are up. Even trade flows show the impact. Canadian exports to the U.S. have dropped about 2% this year, equal to a $5 billion loss. These are not abstract numbers. They represent families in border towns, businesses losing revenue, and communities shifting their habits. Hoekstra's remarks only reinforce the sense that Canadians must close ranks and protect their own market.
We have the ambition, but a deal is a deal, and a deal has to go for both sides. And Canada will agree a deal that's in the best interest of Canadians. It should not surprise anyone, including the U.S. ambassador, who's doing a very good job, I would add. Thank you. For America.
Against this backdrop, Prime Minister Mark Carney responded. He did not shout or escalate. Instead, he drew a clear line. Carney said Canada would only pursue agreements that benefit Canadians, not deals designed in Washington. The so-called bigger deal suggested by the ambassador, covering steel, energy, and critical minerals, is not on the table unless it clearly serves Canada's interests. Carney reminded audiences that the USMCA already provides a functioning trade framework. While consultations with businesses are underway in all three countries, Ottawa is not desperate for a new bargain. Canada, he emphasized, has options. From deepening ties with Mexico to expanding trade with Europe and Asia, diversification is already shaping the future. The contrast could not be sharper. Hoekstra looked frustrated, searching for passion that is no longer there. Carney appeared as a steady statesman, reassuring Canadians that their sovereignty and industries will not be sacrificed. Carney's approach also resonated internationally. European and Asian partners have taken note of Canada's stance, interpreting it as a sign that Ottawa is serious about building a diversified trade network. By staying calm while Washington complained, Carney not only strengthened his hand at home, but also signaled abroad that Canada is a stable, reliable partner. This matters in a global economy where investors and governments alike are searching for certainty in the face of Trump's unpredictable swings. In the end, what was meant to downplay conflict has backfired. Hoekstra's remarks exposed Washington's frustration rather than Canada's weakness. Instead of dividing Canadians, they united public opinion and highlighted the real costs of Trump's tariffs. Canada now looks more confident, more willing to say no, and more determined to chart its own course. The optics are striking. The United States, once seen as the senior partner, now appears petty and defensive. Canada, once accused of being too reliant, now projects resilience and choice. Families who remember the sting of tariffs hear their leader promise not to repeat old mistakes. Workers see that their government is prepared to defend jobs and industries. This is the new reality of the relationship. Canada will negotiate only as an equal. Washington's pressure tactics no longer work. Instead of shaming Canadians into compliance, Hoekstra has shown how far America's leverage has slipped. Trump's tariff play, meant to force concessions, has left the United States isolated, while Canada grows stronger in conviction and strategy. Halifax will not be remembered for easing tensions, but for exposing U.S. frustration and Canada's resolve. What Trump called economic warfare has instead built resilience in Ottawa and unity among citizens. Canada's message is clear. It will work with the U.S. only as an equal, never on weaker terms.
Well, ahead of renegotiating the existing North American Free Trade Agreement, Canada and Mexico have signed a pact aimed at deepening economic ties.
We will scale up our engagement in foreign affairs, in trade and investment, in agriculture, natural resources, in energy, finance, health, the environment, and public safety and security.
When President Trump announced his program of reciprocal tariffs in 2025, the goal was clear. Ottawa was supposed to bend under the weight of higher duties on steel, aluminum, and even copper. The United States believed Canada would be left isolated, with no choice but to make concessions. Yet, something different has unfolded. Instead of isolation, Canada has been pushed to seek allies, and the most visible outcome came during Prime Minister Mark Carney's whirlwind 36-hour trip to Mexico City. There, Canada and Mexico signed a strategic partnership agreement. The trip was short, but the message was long-lasting. Trump's attempt to corner Canada is instead motivating new continental bonds.
Billed as a comprehensive strategic partnership, it includes a plan to build infrastructure like ports, rail, and energy corridors. They'll also work closer on tackling organized crime and protecting the environment.
Mexico now looks more important to Canada than it has in decades. Under President Claudia Sheinbaum, Mexico is pursuing domestic reforms and seeking partners beyond Washington. That opens a door for Ottawa. Agriculture is a prime example. Canadian canola producers have struggled with tariffs and a loss of Chinese demand. Mexico's growing biofuel sector gives them a chance to regain markets. The deal also touches energy and infrastructure, with both governments pledging cooperation on ports, rail lines, and energy corridors. For Canada, this means a way to move resources more efficiently, something that has long been a weakness in trade negotiations. For Mexico, it means more investment and reliable access to Canadian goods. Analysts also point out that this partnership signals a wider shift in North America, where smaller nations are forced to adapt quickly or risk falling behind in Trump's high-pressure trade environment. What Trump once used as a wedge to split Ottawa and Mexico City has now created common ground. At the heart of this renewed alliance lies a shared concern. Both governments know that Trump views the North American Trade Pact with suspicion. As the review of SUSMA approaches in 2026, the risk of dismantling the deal is real. Canada has already launched public consultations with businesses, open from September 20 to November 3, 2025, to gather feedback on vulnerabilities and priorities. Mexico began a similar process on September 17. The timing is deliberate. Both countries are preparing for unpredictable negotiations, and the fear is that Washington could use tariffs as leverage again. Trump's record shows he is willing to threaten withdrawal or impose new barriers if it suits his domestic agenda. That is why Carney and Sheinbaum framed their new pact as complementary to SUSMA, careful not to present it as a block against the United States. The words are diplomatic, but the intent is clear. Both Canada and Mexico want insurance in case the United States turns its back on the agreement. Carney's government understands that leverage in 2026 will not come from speeches but from results. For years, Canada has struggled to move its oil, gas, and minerals to market, weakening its hand. Building a working partnership with Mexico addresses that gap. It creates a sense that Canada can stand on more than one leg in the North American economy. For Trump, this is the irony. The very tariffs meant to weaken Ottawa are strengthening its resolve and broadening its partnerships. Canada and Mexico are now positioning themselves to present a more united and prepared front when negotiations open next year. Instead of breaking Canada's confidence, U.S. policy has forced Ottawa to act with urgency and build alliances that had been neglected since the early days of NAFTA. The story today is not of a country retreating under pressure, but of one seeking new ground. What was intended as economic punishment is reshaping the trade map of North America. Canada and Mexico stand side by side, and the result shows that Trump's tariffs have backfired in ways Washington never anticipated.